Hello everyone, welcome to the 7th week of this massive open online course on philosophical foundations of social research. In this week, in the 7th week, in terms of two lectures, we are going to, if you look at this in terms of in the 7th week, in terms of two lectures, we are going to discuss positivism versus hermeneutics, or phenomenological tradition in contradistinction with positivistic approaches to social sciences. And in this, we are going to discuss natural sciences versus social sciences, objectivity and subjectivity in social sciences, and quantitative and qualitative research traditions. We are going to discuss these in the context of the controversies between positivism on the one hand and hermeneutics on the other. Okay? But how can we frame these controversies? We are going to frame such controversies against the backdrop of these three criteria, namely natural sciences and social sciences, objectivity and subjectivity in social sciences, and quantitative and qualitative research traditions. Okay? We are going to do this in terms of two lectures when we try to compare and contrast, and when we try to make a distinction between positivism and hermeneutics, or positivism and phenomenological tradition, or positivism versus Verstehen. Okay. As you all know that we have already discussed positivism, that in the context of Comte, in the context of the central tenets of positivism, how positivism as a stage of a transition from theological stage to metaphysical stage to positivistic or scientific stage. In the positivistic stage, we have discussed there are certain parameters, or there are certain guidelines, there are certain principles, there are certain characteristics, there are certain features, there are certain tenets of positivism. What are those tenets then? Now, one is methodological, that science is distinct from all areas of human activity or creativity because it possesses a method unique to it. Secondly, methodological monism, that there is only one single method common to all sciences irrespective of their subject matter, that is methodological monism. Thirdly, inductivism, that the method of science is the method of induction, that from particular instances you tend to arrive at concrete generalization. That is the principle of induction. Okay? And fourthly, we have discussed systematic verifiability. In other words, that the hallmark of science lies in the fact that all scientific statements must be systematically verifiable. Fifthly, we have discussed fact-value dichotomy, that in the positivistic schema, okay, science is based on facts. Science does not believe in values. Science is value free because science is based on facts. That is why I told you that if I say that this is a computer, this is a fact. Okay? If I say this computer looks beautiful, then I add value to it, and science does not believe in value, because it may appear to me, it may appear beautiful to me, but it may not appear beautiful to you. Okay? Science does not believe in that. Science believes in facts. That is why values have no factual content. Okay? And facts are value free. That is why science must be value free, because it is based on facts. We have also discussed there is a unilinear relationship between observation and theory. Observations are pure in the sense that theories are dependent on observations, whereas observations are theory independent. Okay? Observation leads to theory generation, but the converse is not true. In this sense, positivists argued in favor of science. Okay? That is why you must understand the demarcation, autonomy and cognitive authority of science over non-sciences, demarcation between science and non-science, autonomy of science over non-sciences, and cognitive authority of science so far as non-sciences are concerned, in this sense. Okay? We have discussed this. Now, what we are going to do, we are going to look at if whether the methods of science, the way social sciences developed and they tried to model their methods in line with natural sciences, and whether they can be absolutely replicable in social sciences, I mean natural methods in natural sciences, study of nature and study of human action, are they same, or do they require different methods, or we can strike a critical balance between the study of nature and study of human action. Okay. Hermeneutics, phenomenological sociology provide us with a scope where we can understand the marked difference between the study of nature and the study of human action, in this sense. Okay. Please do not think that positivism has been rejected or something, or hermeneutics has been propounded, but we are trying to understand the difference between positivism and hermeneutics, and how we can use both positivistic and hermeneutics methods in social sciences. Okay? That is very important. In research cannot be reduced to only one ideology, one viewpoint. Research must try to take many viewpoints, okay? Multiple viewpoints. Okay? Multiculturalism is the ethos of social sciences. Okay? That is how social sciences have thrived over a period of time. Okay? When multiculturalism becomes the casualty, then social sciences suffer. When we come to hermeneutics, hermeneutics refers to the theory and method of interpreting meaningful human action. Interpretation is important. Interpreting meaningful human action. Okay. We have discussed the typology of action in the Weberian schema. Okay. What are those types? Now, the traditional social action, okay, the affective or emotive social action, value rational social action, and goal rational social action, which is alternatively known as instrumental rationality. Okay. Now, for Weber, as we have already discussed, okay, in the especially in the fourth week that we have already discussed, that for Weber, value rational social action and goal rational social action, they constitute meaningful social action, they are reflective in nature. Okay? The other two are not. I mean traditional social action or affective or emotive social action, they are unreflective in nature. Okay? If you go ahead with meaningful social action, hermeneutics, phenomenological sociology, they try to go ahead with meaningful social action. It is and how are you going to do this? No, by interpreting meaningful social action, because interpretation depends on the context, the positionality, the perspective. Okay? Meaningful social action may differ from person to person, from context to context. Okay? Hermeneutic tradition has a long history being rooted in the problems of biblical interpretation. Before printing, for example, when Bibles were produced by hand copying, numerous errors were introduced. Hermeneutics referred to the problem of recovering the authentic version of the Bible. Okay? In the early part of the 19th century, the proponents of hermeneutics became interested in how to interpret any text. Just by concentrating on the text itself, as in the case of biblical interpretation, but also by reference to the experiences of the author's experiences. Who has drafted this? Okay. When we go ahead with interpretation, we not only interpret the text, but we also look at the action, a picture, maybe a book, maybe a painting. Okay. The author's experiences are also important. What forces an author to depict violence? What forces an author to depict peace? What forces the author to emphasize on science, scientific temper, critical inquiry? Okay. The author's experiences as well as the text, okay, they undergo the process of interpretation. The subject, I mean hermeneutics, became more developed in the work of Dilthey. Okay. Dilthey argued that there is a marked difference. Dilthey argued that there is a marked difference between the study of nature and the study of human action. That is why when I said that the subject of hermeneutics became more developed in the works of Dilthey, who argued that there is a marked difference between the study of nature and the study of human action. I mean that the study of nature was in the purview of positivism, whereas the study of human action is in the purview of hermeneutics. Okay? This is very important. When I said there is a marked difference between the study of nature and the study of human action, which being an expression, human action, which being an expression of lived experience, requires a special method of analysis. Very often we see that in our day to day life that people, I mean women can speak for themselves. Okay? Only women, only Dalits, only marginalized communities, only the poor, okay, they have different, for example, they have different narratives altogether. Whichever way the author tries to depict those narratives, perhaps fails to do that. Only they can do that. Okay? Only those subjects, they can do that. They can depict, they can express their lived experience. Okay? And in this sense, as I said, Dilthey made a marked difference between or Dilthey argued that there is a marked difference between the study of nature, I mean positivism on the one hand, and the study of human action, I mean hermeneutics on the other. I mean when I said study of human action, I mean which being an expression of lived experience requires a special method of analysis. I cannot study human action, I cannot study lived experience by the principles which positivists argued for, that the method of induction and so on. Perhaps I will not be able to do that. I require certain other methods of inquiry. Okay. Dilthey effectively provided two such methods. Okay. What are these two methods? In the first, the focus was on the relationship of the creator of an act or a book or a picture to the interpreter. Then there are two individuals here, one the creator and the interpreter. The interpreter understands by putting herself or himself in the position of the creator. Suppose I want to study farmer suicide. I am the interpreter. Okay. Those who have committed suicide, I must be able to understand by putting myself in the position of those farmers who have committed suicide or who are undergoing the phase where you will not find any hope. Then I must understand. Understanding, if you slightly recall, we have discussed understanding in the context of Verstehen, I mean Weberian Verstehen, Max Web. We are going to discuss Verstehen a little while later. Okay. Then I must try to understand by putting myself in the position of the actor. Okay. Understanding is possible because both share a common humanity, or in another formulation because they are both expressions of the spirit. Dilthey's argument. In the second method, the characteristics of individuals are disregarded. Instead, hermeneutics understands human action in relation to some wider whole which gives it meaning. For example, a painting is understood by reference to the outlook or the worldview of the society in which it is a problem. Similarly, the analyst can construct such a worldview out of its individual manifestations. This circular relationship between a whole and its parts is known as a hermeneutic circle. Suppose, let me give you an example. If I say a painting which could capture the horrendous crimes and casualties perpetrated by the Second World War. Maybe I'll try to capture the painting of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Maybe I'll try to capture a painting from the Bengal famine. I'll try to capture the painting of a communal holocaust. Then that painting is understood by reference to the outlook or worldview of the society in which it is a problem, right. Suppose I want to draw a painting or I want to interpret a painting of migrant workers during the phase of the lockdown, nationwide lockdown. How people migrated from different parts of the country to their native place. So many people passed away because of this, so many people experienced horrendous, they had terrible experiences while migrating from one place to the other. Then that painting will depict or that painting will be understood by making a reference to the outlook or the worldview of the society in which it is a problem. Similarly, the interpreter or the analyst can construct such a worldview out of her or his individual manifestations. Okay. This circular relationship between a whole and its parts is nothing but a hermeneutic circle. Okay. Karl Mannheim, one of the founders of the sociology of knowledge perspective, he wrote Ideology and Utopia, he wrote the Sociology of Science and so on. Mannheim advanced similar arguments. Mannheim suggested that individual and cultural manifestations can be understood by seeing them as part of a larger worldview. Okay? The analysis attaches, such analysis attaches documentary meaning to human actions. This has nothing to do with intentions, but makes this nothing to do with with intention, intentions, but makes sense in the context of worldview. This is important. Okay. Okay. Perhaps there is no purpose, there is no intention, but the worldview, the outlook that you have. Okay. For example, the documentary meaning of a painting can be understood by locating it within the worldview of the society or group which has produced it. Okay. And in this sense, Mannheim was a clear-cut positivist, no doubt about it. Mannheim said all knowledge except scientific knowledge. Mannheim suggested that all knowledge except scientific knowledge is socially, scientific knowledge is socially and culturally conditioned. Okay? But except scientific knowledge, and that's why he made a demarcation between science and non-science. Okay? But I mean, that's why we have mentioned that what is the first tenet of positivism? That science is distinct from all areas of human activity or creativity because it possesses a method unique to it. Now, what is that method? Now, the method of induction, method to study nature. Okay? That is why hermeneutics has formed part of a general critique of positivism in sociology, okay, in which human action is seen as caused by social structures of various kinds. However, the difficulty of hermeneutic analysis has always been seen how to validate such interpretations. When I said hermeneutics has formed part of a general critique of positivism in sociology, that the study of nature and the study of human action cannot be equated on equal parlance, there must be different methods of analysis to study nature on the one hand and to study human action on the other, in which human action is seen as caused by human actions. Human action is seen as caused by social structures of various kinds. Nevertheless, the difficulty of hermeneutic analysis has always been how to validate interpretations, how to validate interpretations. Suppose X has been interpreted by you and by me, but what is the way to validate? Your interpretation may be different from my interpretation, but how are you going to validate? This is a problem within hermeneutics. On the face of it, one interpretation of the meaning of an action or text is as good as another. The solution offered to this problem, as we have already discussed, that is the hermeneutics circle. Okay, that if I say for example, a painting is understood by reference to the outlook or the worldview of the society in which it is a problem. Similarly, the interpreter or the analyst can construct such a worldview out of its individual manifestations, and this circular relationship between a whole and its parts is known as hermeneutics circle. Okay. For example, I mean when I say part and whole, hermeneutic circle and so on, Gadamer insists that hermeneutics has to understand the part in terms of the whole and the whole in terms of the part. Part part in terms of the whole and the whole in terms of the part. Okay. For Gadamer, hermeneutics must understand the part in terms of the whole and the whole in terms of the part. The interpreter or the analyst in judging a book, for example, okay, has to recapture the perspective within which the author has formulated her or his views. There must be, I mean, while judging a book, while judging a text, while judging a painting, while judging a picture, while judging an event, okay, the interpreter, the analyst has to recapture the perspective within which the author has formulated her or his views. For Gadamer, the spatial and temporal, for Gadamer, the spatial and temporal gap between the author and the interpreter is breached by tradition. Okay. And this one, if I say the spatial and temporal gap between the author and the interpreter is breached by tradition, then and by what Gadamer calls a fusion of horizons. Nevertheless, the gap can never be completely breached. There can never be a completely correct interpretation. Okay. You cannot say that interpretations are absolute. Interpretations are always relative to the context in which they are produced historically. Interpretation is historically conditioned because it is relative. You just cannot say that interpretation is absolute. As in the context of positivism, natural sciences, you have seen that no, science may be absolute. Okay. But in social sciences, in interpretive social sciences, there cannot be any completely correct interpretation. Interpretations are always tentative in nature and subject to revision in the hermeneutic circle that we have already discussed. Hermeneutic circle, that the circular relationship between a whole and its parts, okay, is known as a hermeneutic circle. Okay. That is why interpretations are never absolute, interpretations are tentative in nature and so on. When you look at phenomenological sociology, that from hermeneutics we are going to phenomenological sociology through the works of Alfred Suge and others, Alfred Suge, and then we'll also discuss in part, I mean, Berger and Luckman, the social construction of reality, and then we will also discuss Verstehen. Okay. What you will find in phenomenological sociology, it is a type of sociology derived from phenomenological philosophy. Okay. Phenomenological sociology takes its main aim the analysis and description of everyday life. I mean the life world. Suge and others, they have very often used this term life world, Lebenswelt. I mean, in English it is known as life world. Okay. I mean, when I said phenomenological sociology takes its main aim the analysis and description of everyday life, that is the life world and its associated states of consciousness. Okay. Life world, okay, and then consciousness, associated states of consciousness, intellectual consciousness, political consciousness, okay, and so on. The studies, I mean studies on phenomenological sociology are carried out by bracketing of judgments about social structure, that is making no assumption about the existence or causal powers of social structure. No causal powers of social structure. Okay. No assumption about the existence or causal powers of social structure. The proponents of phenomenology argue that although people generally take the everyday world for granted, a phenomenological analysis must show how it has been made up, okay? How it has been constructed. If I have to consider in this way, phenomenological sociology is part of the movement. Phenomenological sociology is part of the movement criticizing positivist methods in sociology. In particular, practitioners of the subject phenomenological sociology have objected to the notion that human beings are formed by social forces rather than creating the social world themselves, to the neglect of the meaning of human actions and to the use of causal analysis of human action. Phenomenologists have felt that these features tend to neglect the uniquely human character of social interaction. Okay. Phenomenology has entered sociology largely through the work of Alfred Suge. Okay. However, the best known sociological study informed by phenomenological principles is that by Peter L. Berger and Thomas Lockman in 1967. I mean, Berger and Lockman's starting point is a phenomenological analysis of the knowledge appropriate to everyday life. Okay? This is important. I mean everyday life, when I say life, world, lived experiences and so on, that is why they try to look at, re-examine the foundations of sociology of knowledge. There must be different foundations of sociology of knowledge. We must try to question the foundation of of knowledge. There cannot be any single foundation of knowledge, there must be multiple foundations of knowledge, and that is why I said Berger and Luckman's starting point is a phenomenological analysis of the knowledge appropriate to everyday life. By everyday life I mean life world, I mean Lebenswelt just now we have discussed. Such knowledge is almost always characterized by typification. I mean we tend to classify everything, types, typology and so on, and is essentially oriented to solving practical problems. Berger and Luckman then suggest that this everyday knowledge is creatively produced by individuals who are also influenced by the accumulated weight of institutionalized knowledge by others. Whether it is peace or whether it is violence, whether it is science, whether it is superstition, perhaps we always try to institutionalize them. Okay, maybe you will find that at one point of time the state is trying to institutionalize science, at the same time you will find the state is trying to institutionalize superstition. Okay, that is very important. Okay, that's why I said that Berger and Luckman's starting point is a phenomenological analysis of the knowledge appropriate to the Lebenswelt, appropriate to the life world, appropriate to the everyday life, and such knowledge about everyday life, knowledge about life world, or knowledge about lived experiences, knowledge about the Lebenswelt is almost always characterized by typification and is essentially oriented to towards solving practical problems. And they then suggest, I mean Berger and Luckman then suggest that this everyday knowledge is creatively produced by individuals who are also influenced by the accumulated weight of institutionalized knowledge produced by others. But you will find that phenomenological sociology has not greatly influenced sociology as a whole, and has also been subjected to extensive criticism, a critique. Okay. It has been argued that it deals with trivial topics, it is purely descriptive in nature, it has had very little empirical application, and it also neglects the notion of social structure. Why? No, the topics, whether they are trivial or not, we just cannot decide that these topics are trivial, these topics are not trivial. We just cannot decide that, right? But what the proponents of positivism they have accused that the proponents of hermeneutics that hermeneutics or phenomenological sociology, they deal with trivial topics. I mean phenomenological sociology is purely descriptive in nature. When I said they are purely descriptive in nature, they only try to look at perhaps what is it, the question of what is it, maybe how is it, but they never look at the proponents of hermeneutics, the proponents of phenomenological sociology. Perhaps they have never looked at the question of why is it. Okay, and that's why it has very little empirical application. Empiricism always tries to provide some explanation. Okay, what is it and how is it, they try to capture descriptive social sciences, descriptive sociology, and on the contrary, the question why is it tries to address the question, tries to address the explanatory question. Okay. And thus phenomenological sociology also neglects the notion of social structure. In this sense, there is a critique of phenomenological sociology, and Alfred Suze's phenomenological sociology that we want to consider now that Suze's phenomenological sociology wanted to construct an adequate theory of social action, partly based on a critique of Max Weber. That Suze did not want to look at that typology of social action, that traditional social action, affective or emotive social action, value rational social action, goal rational social action by Weber. Rather, Suze's phenomenological sociology carried out a series of investigations into the construction of the life world, that is Lebenswelt. Okay? How our everyday life has been constructed, under what circumstances we tend to construct our life world, everyday life and so on. Whether we are trying to construct our life world, or we are the subjects of the construction of the life world, or we have been reduced to the objects while constructing the life world. Okay? Suze's phenomenological sociology also tried to investigate the manner in which a sociology that took human action as important could be scientific, whether the study of human action can be absolutely scientific or not. Okay? Precisely because there must be different methods to understand the study of nature on the one hand and the study of human action on the other. If there is a marked difference so far as the methods to study nature and the methods to study human action, I mean there is a marked difference between the study of nature and the study of human action. Okay. While studying nature we need the method of explanation, then while studying human action we must adapt the method of understanding. Then there is a marked difference between the method of explanation on the one hand and the method of understanding on the other. Okay. Then we go back to Weberian form of understanding, Weberian form of Verstehen. If you slightly recall, we have discussed Verstehen in the third and fourth weeks, especially fourth week, when we discussed methodological individualism, meaningful social action, interpretative understanding of social action, I mean observatory understanding and explanatory understanding, ideal types and so on. We have already discussed Verstehen, but in the context of the controversies between positivism on the one hand and hermeneutic tradition on the other, we will try to look at Verstehen. Verstehen, when you look at, usually translated as understanding. Okay. Now, Verstehen, as you know, it is understanding of social action, individual action and so. This concept of this concept Verstehen has formed part of a critique of positivistic or naturalist sociology. It is argued that sociology should not analyze human action from outside. Sociology should not analyze human action from outside by copying the methods of natural sciences, because the method of understanding must be different from the method of natural sciences, the method of explanation. Instead, sociology should recognize the meanings which are attached to individual actions. Verstehen is the procedure by which sociologists can have access to these meanings. Weber defined sociology as being, I mean that individual social action is very important, meanings and meaningful social action. I mean Weber defined sociology as being concerned with meaningful social action. Verstehen consists of placing oneself in the position of the other people to see what meaning they give to their actions. That is nothing but cognitive empathy, that putting I mean, if I have to understand the other's position, then I have to place myself in other's shoes. Okay? That is why such situation, if I have to understand the problem of the farming community, if I have to understand the problem of the migrant workers, I must put myself in their positions to understand them. That calls for nothing but cognitive empathy. Okay? Understanding the what is cognitive empathy? No, understanding the need or role of the other. Okay? This is very important. That is why I said Verstehen consists of placing oneself in the position of the other people to see what meaning they give to their actions. For example, if sociologists wish to analyze the social circumstances of weaving, they must have some basis for deciding which cases for flapping one's arm up or down are waving and which means something else. Not to be able to investigate the meaning of the actions may be seriously misleading, in that actions might all be put together in one category when they actually belong in different ones. To some extent, the inspection of meaning involved here is simply an extension of everyday attempts to understand action. These are interpretations. Okay. Nevertheless, Weber wishes to go further by reconciling interpretations of action by Verstehen with causal explanation. That is why I always said that I have always maintained that Weberian theoretical positions and methodological writings are always usually characterized as effectively affecting a reconciliation between positivist and neo-Kantian positions. Okay. That is why Weber wishes to go further by reconciling interpretation of action by Verstehen with causal explanations. I mean, when I said interpretation or interpretation of action by Verstehen, I mean that is a neo-Kantian position, and when I said causal explanation, I mean that is the positivistic position. Okay. It is not entirely clear what is meant here, and interpreters of Weber have variously suggested that Verstehen merely generates causal hypothesis or that meanings can function as causes. Then perhaps one more interpretation can be that Verstehen merely generates causal hypothesis or that meanings can function as causes. The use of Verstehen has been criticized from 2 points of view. Okay. On the one hand, sociologists have argued that there is no way of validating Verstehen interpretations, and on the other hand, one is about the question of validity, and on the other hand, it has been suggested that the attempt to reconcile causal and Verstehen, causal explanations, causal relationships, causal powers on the one hand, and Verstehen, I mean interpretation of action on the other, causal and Verstehen analysis, I mean the attempt to reconcile causal and Verstehen analysis actually ends up by denying the actor's point of view. If you look at this, then what have we, I mean if you look at the critique of Verstehen, okay, you will find that in sociology, hermeneutics is the interpretation and understanding of social events through analysis of their meanings and for the human participants in the events. It enjoyed prominence during the 1960s and 1970s and differs from other interpretive schools of sociology in that it emphasizes the importance of both context and form within any given social behavior. Okay. In what then what have we discussed in this lecture? Okay. Quickly we will try to recapitulate whatever we have discussed till now. We started with the controversies between positivistic sociology and hermeneutic or phenomenological sociology in terms of three parameters: natural sciences and social sciences, objectivity and subjectivity in social sciences, quantitative and qualitative research traditions. Okay. We have discussed hermeneutics in terms of meaningful social action and others, how Dilthey provided two methods, because Dilthey argued that there is a marked difference between the study of nature and the study of human action. Therefore, he suggested two methods which are important to study human action. Okay. And then we have discussed hermeneutic circle and Mannheimian position also we have discussed. Then the way Mannheim took a more positivistic position, still he tried to look at individual and cultural manifestations part of a larger worldview. And then we have discussed critique of positivism in sociology, Gadamer's position part and whole, interpreter and author, and the way we have discussed the spatial and temporal gap between the author and the interpreter is bridged by tradition, perhaps and what Gadamer says that calls fusion of horizons. Perhaps the such gap can never be bridged completely, because no interpretation can be absolutely correct, because interpretations are always tentative in nature. Okay. And then we have discussed phenomenological sociology, Berger and Luckman's reflections on everyday life, typification and others, and there is a critique of phenomenological sociology. Then we have discussed Suze's phenomenological sociology, as he wanted to construct an adequate theory of social action, partly based on a critique of Weber, and Suze's phenomenological sociology carried out a series of investigations into the construction of the life world, and also Suze's phenomenological sociology tried to investigate the manner in which a sociology that human action as important could be scientific. Then we have discussed Verstehen and Verstehen, I mean critique of positivist or naturalist sociology, because one cannot examine an action from outside. Verstehen is not based on natural sciences, but rather based on human action. We have discussed individual social actions and how meanings are attached to individual social action. We have also discussed understanding the need of the other, understanding the role of the other in terms of cognitive empathy, and we have also discussed interpretations, okay, interpretations of human action. Okay. And then we have also provided a critique of phenomenological, critique of Verstehen, and the central principle of sociological hermeneutics is that it is only possible to know the meaning of an act or statement within the context of the discourse or worldview from which it originates. Context is critical to comprehension. An action or event that carries substantial weight to one person or culture may be viewed as meaningless or entirely different to another. For example, giving a thumbs up gesture is widely accepted as a sign of a job well done in the United States of America, while other cultures view it as an insult. Similarly, putting a piece of paper into a box might be considered a meaningless act unless it is put into the context of democratic elections, the act of putting a ballot paper into a box. If you look at this, then what we are going to do in the next lecture, we are going to discuss basically in this lecture we have discussed natural sciences versus in social sciences, and what we are going to do in the next lecture. In this lecture we have completed this one, and in the next lecture, I mean in the 19th lecture, we are going to discuss the controversies arising out of the debates, the differences between positivism and hermeneutics, not only as theoretical constructs, but as methodological devices. Okay. We are going to consider objectivity and subjectivity in social sciences and quantitative and qualitative research traditions when we look at the controversies between positivism and hermeneutics. What we are going to do, we are going to look at in the next lecture the controversies between positivism and hermeneutics in terms of objectivity and subjectivity in social sciences on the one hand and quantitative and qualitative research traditions on the other. Okay? That is what we are going to do in the next lecture. Thank you.